This afternoon, what I want to talk to you about is a transition. We've just passed the threshold of the second century of electronic mass media. And though there wasn't a lot of fanfare around that, I think this era that we're moving into is going to be characterized by a collision between two totally different architectures, an architecture of coercion and an architecture of collaboration. And that is what I'm going to speak to you about this afternoon. You know, for a generation that grew up, mastering the remote here. Got it. For a generation that grew up with computers and internet access, the WWW no longer stands for the World Wide Web. For them, it stands for whatever, whenever, and wherever. So they have a full expectation that they are going to be able to consume media on the device of their choosing on their terms when they want to watch it. Now, that seems fairly obvious to people who work in the digital media business, but that presents a profound challenge to the economics and the business models of the media business. And so this is what I'm going to investigate a little bit further this afternoon. 20 years ago, I was the head of on-air creative at MTV in New York, and I had worked all over the world and had come back to New York to run the on-air branding for MTV. I was fascinated by the prospect of interactive television. Now, this was in 1992, so it sort of predated the World Wide Web. And at that time, cable television was seen as kind of like the pioneering technology. And my colleagues down the hall in the research department knew that I was excited by this idea of interactive TV, so they gave me this book. And it was a book prepared by Cable Labs, which is the research arm of the cable industry in the United States. And this book was called Delivering Interactive Services Over Cable. And it envisioned an incredible array of services. In fact, it's quite a document. It's 20 years old at this point, but at that time, they had figured out the business model and the concept and all the technology for services, new kinds of video services, game services, music services, new ways for people to communicate, new ways for communities to get together and chat, entirely new concepts for how to sell things. They were going after local classified ads. They had concepts for how to sell cars and even real estate. It was quite an impressive scope, this document. And so I was very excited by this thing. Well, what happened after that? Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. In the entire decade of the 1990s, cable simply failed to innovate. They didn't introduce any new services. And really, the only big new services they've introduced in the last 20 years have been video on demand and the triple play, the data service and the voice service. So this is quite strange, right? And at the exact same time, while nothing was going on in the cable world to innovate, what you had happening in this other realm, this brand new realm of the World Wide Web, was a tremendous proliferation of new ideas. And all of these businesses, which are kind of the class of 1999, emerged, and by the end of the 1990s, had established valuations in the billions, sometimes in the tens or hundreds of billions of dollars. And so the huge amounts of value was created, but it was not created inside of the closed system of the cable operator. Now, I've been puzzled about that for many, many years. I've launched services all over the world on every single platform that you can imagine. And I've always been scratching my head thinking, why is it that certain services launch quickly and grow so fast, and other times companies try to launch a business and they'll invest effort and time into it, but it doesn't quite catch on? Well, I saw this quote from the architect Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, and this really resonated with me. He said, "Architecture is the will of the age conceived in spatial terms." I thought about that. Now, he was talking about his particular style of architecture, the international style from the mid-century. But if you take that as kind of a metaphor for the architectures that we work with, of course, you think about the open architecture that we always talk about on the web, these open protocols that have enabled anybody who has the desire to launch a new business. You simply don't need permission. But then if you look back at 100 years of history of mass media, you'll see that these are entirely closed architectures. So this is a completely different world. And so my question is this question of the will of the age. Which is the will of the age that we're moving into in this 21st century? Is it a closed architecture or an open one? The architectures that are open are optimized for value creation in terms of numbers of users, rapid growth of users, and opportunities for users to participate. The architectures that are closed are optimized for revenue generation and actually revenue extraction. And so if you're a person who works at one of these companies, you're actually going to pick up subtle cues about what's important to your management, what's important to the corporation. It's not like someone writes a memo and says, this is what you must do. But if you look at the kinds of people who work at the kinds of companies that I'm referring to, you'll know that those companies that are designed for value creation, well, their employees and all the creative energy in those companies is oriented towards finding new ways to get the audience to cooperate. So they're designing cooperative architectures. Whereas people who work inside of businesses that are designed for revenue maximization or value extraction, they tend to pick up the cue that what they're really there to do is to design new services that coerce the user into a predefined role as a consumer. And they're really defined, those services are really optimized to separate that person from their money. The ultimate example of this, perhaps the classic metaphor for this, is the walled garden. It was popularized in the 1990s. John Malone is a pioneer of cable television in the United States, and he once said that this model of a walled garden is by far the best way to maximize revenue. And it's true. I mean, cable TV, it's a fantastic business model, right? You get paid twice. You get paid by subscribers, and you also get paid by advertisers. In the history of media, there's never been a better business model than that. By the mid-1990s in the US, cable TV was encroaching on the telcos. The telcos were also eager to get into that video business, so the United States government decided to deregulate and create competition. And so cable companies were able then to offer this triple play that was comprised of voice services, data services, and of course the pay video services. Now there was a Trojan horse built into that. Inside of these data services, these broadband services, were the capability of delivering video and also voice. And so this actually threatened the business model of the cable operator. This destabilized the prospects for pay television as these new streaming video services came online. YouTube, Netflix, very prominent example I'll talk about in a second. And also things like BitTorrent, things that enable people to maybe file share illegally to get access to content that they can't otherwise get. So this created a conundrum for the cable operator, for the people that run these services. Now just to put it in perspective, in the United States, it's very different from other countries. In the United States, cable is dominant. In the United States, 90% of the viewing of television is through pay TV services, either cable or IPTV from the telco or satellite television. Only 10% of the households in America watch free-to-air broadcast TV over the air. So cable is the predominant way of accessing video services in the United States. Now, the notion that these new services could arise and be delivered through the same infrastructure that actually threatened cable, well, that created kind of a reaction inside of the cable business, inside the telco companies, the cable operators. The first reaction it created is this reaction of greed. This is really what drives a lot of the business of delivering video services. Recently, we had a major merger in the United States, the largest media merger ever in history. Comcast, which is the biggest cable system operator in the United States, acquired NBC Universal, which is one of the biggest media companies. This is a gigantic merger. Just to put it in perspective, here's the many businesses that they picked up. So these are all now part of Comcast. You have the many cable channels, two big TV networks, NBC, and, which is the original broadcast network in the United States, and Telemundo, one of the two Spanish language networks. And also a number of digital services. They have the motion picture studio Universal with 7,000 films in their library, and theme parks as well. So Comcast is now suddenly a major player in the content business. This is like a classic example of vertical integration. Let's look at the numbers here. 50, 125, and 85. 50 billion in revenue for the combined entity, and also they happen to own 50 cable networks. No correlation there, but that number 50 is an important one. 125, Comcast now owns a stake in 125 different media companies. And 85, well, 85 is 85% of the US households do not have any competition for broadband. Effectively, they have one choice for a broadband provider. And so we haven't really got an option of where to go. Comcast serves 25% of those households, so they control 1 out of 4 homes in the United States. And in case you're interested to know how valuable was this deal for Comcast, well, there's 3 other numbers I'm going to share with you. 130 and 385. 100, Comcast spent $100 million on lobbying to convince the federal government to approve this merger. And they actually hired 100 ex-government officials to serve as lobbyists for them. The 30, well, that's the number of lobbying companies that Comcast hired to work Capitol Hill. And 385, that's the number of members of Congress who received donations from either Comcast or their political action committee to ensure their support for their merger. So this was a very, very valuable move for Comcast. Because as you know, the cable TV business is limited by geography. And so they couldn't continue to grow their cable system, so what they had to do is grow vertically into the content business. Now, there's a lot of speculation in the US that this is going to trigger kind of a war, an escalation in some form of consolidation, as other cable system operators and telcos might also choose to start to acquire content companies and go totally vertical. This is a scary prospect if you're in the content business, because it's going to shrink the number of outlets, it'll shrink the number of buyers, and ultimately for consumers, it could shrink diversity. So this is actually quite a chilling prospect for American content companies and consumers. We've seen this movie before. 10 years ago, Time Warner merged with AOL, the then dominant internet company. And this was the logic behind that merger at the time. Dick Parsons was the president of Time Warner at the time of the merger. He later became the chairman. And this is what he said at the time. He said, look, when value is moving up and down the value chain, you need to own the whole chain. So this is the logic for these giant mergers and acquisitions. Well, of course, just a few years later, it ended in disaster. And this is what Steve Case recently said on Quora. Someone asked him about the Time Warner AOL merger, and he said, vision without execution is hallucination. And that, sadly, is the story of Time Warner in a nutshell. So it's not that easy to execute. This is a tricky maneuver. Now, Comcast happens to be extraordinarily good. They're very, very good operators. So chances are very good that they're going to have a successful execution of this vertical merger, and they will emerge as the dominant media company in the United States. But it's a perilous path that they're on. Part of the reason they're motivated to do it, though, is because of fear. That's the other big emotional driver here, fear. Any network operator has this primordial fear of being reduced to a bit pipe, a dumb pipe. You know, in the commodity business of shipping data across their network, unable to get into those rich media services, those valuable services on top. So that's one of the big fears that drives the decision-making inside of the media, the technology companies, the telco companies. Another big issue for them is cord cutting. They're fearful that consumers are going to start to cut the cord, drop the service, find some alternative provider. Now, the new term they're using is cord shaving because consumers are starting to cut back. You know, we have a little bit of economic difficulty in the US. People are trimming back their monthly bill, so they're cord shaving. The other thing that causes fear inside of the cable system is the idea of over-the-top services. You hear this term quite a lot lately in the United States. They're fearful of new services coming in that offer video to people but don't monetize the same way, and the cable operator might not participate in that revenue stream, and so that's another threat that they're fearful of. But all of these really are just flavors of the same idea, which is that these companies are afraid of their customers. They're afraid of empowered customers. And they have reason to be afraid of them because customers actually hate them. The cable companies are despised by their customers in the United States. Last quarter, we saw record numbers of cable customers unsubscribe from their services. Now, if you're running a business, a cable operator, these guys are leveraged. They've borrowed enormous amounts of money. In order to service that debt, they need to maintain their subscriber base. That's what all of their valuation is calculated on. So the notion that record numbers of people are dropping the service actually is an existential threat to the company. So this is really serious. Now, in the meantime, what's happening is the growth of video services on the web. And I know you're experiencing some of this in Australia. I'm not as familiar with this market, but we were just comparing notes the last day with some of my colleagues who are other speakers about different things that are emerging in Europe, in the UK, Canada, and elsewhere. And it seems like each country has their version of this. Now, here's a super ugly chart from Morgan Stanley. Forgive me for showing an ugly chart. Let me tell you a little bit about what's happening. On the left side here, you've got this diagram on the left side shows you how bandwidth is consumed, what the bandwidth is being used for in prime time, for landline connections. And as you can see, Netflix, the streaming video service, consumes about 20% of the bandwidth in the United States during prime time hours. And YouTube comprises about 10% of the bandwidth consumption. And then Flash Video, another 6%. So fully 37% of the bandwidth in North America is absorbed by people watching video services of one type or another. Now, on the right side of the diagram, you'll see what's happening in mobile. And this shows, these two charts show the period from January 2010 to September 2010. So just in a 9-month interval, the amount of video consumed, the red, 27%, grew to 41%. So 41% of the bandwidth in the mobile network is being absorbed by video services. 10 years ago, I worked for a company called Packet Video. We launched the very first video services in mobile. And in those days, it was a preposterous notion. I remember I got kicked out of movie studios. I would go talk to them about putting video on a cell phone. And they said, get the hell out of our office. You're crazy. It's never going to happen. Here it is 10 years later, and fully 40% of what's happening in our 3G networks is the consumption of video. So people crave ways to get to alternative video services. Let me drive into Netflix now. Netflix, you've heard about it. I know you're familiar with it. Let me take a second to familiarize everybody in the office about this. Netflix started out as a business that would pop a DVD in the mail to you. And you could hang on to the DVD, watch it, and when you're done, you'd stick it back in the envelope and send it back to them. And actually, they still have a large number of subscribers who use the service that way. And at the time, they were an alternative to your video shop down the street. And really what they were going after was people's frustration with the coercive business model of charging you for late fees or rewind fees on VHS tapes, right? So that was a coercive business model. And Netflix figured out a way to super serve people and say, hey, there's no late fees here. You just pay us a monthly subscription. You can hang on to the disk as long as you want. And when you're done with it, send it back. We'll send you another one. And they developed a really elaborate system on the web for people to start to state their preferences and create a queue, a playlist. And so they started to learn a lot about their customer preferences. And actually, Netflix has an absolutely delightful user interface. It's one of the best ways to browse and learn about film. And they've done a brilliant job of creating algorithms that are predictive, that can understand what you like and start to make recommendations. They've also incorporated all the social features as well. So Netflix has done a superb job of understanding their customer and super serving that customer. Now think again back to the cable company and how much resentment and ill will there is directed to the cable company. These are companies that do not think about their customer in exactly the same way. So unsurprisingly, American consumers are migrating en masse to this service. Now the chart on the left shows that in the period from 2000 to 2010, midway through 2010, June of 2010, Netflix reached 15 million subscribers. Since that time, they've added another 5 million subscribers. They've broken the 20 million threshold. But on the right, the part that I've put in a red circle, that's really what I want to show you. In just an 18-month span since they introduced streaming video, so you can watch instantly. You don't have to order the DVD and get it by mail. But now you can simply sit down in front of your television, click, and instantly watch the video streamed to you. In just 18 months, they've switched 61% of their subscriber base over to that streaming service. This is moving very fast. Remember a moment ago I was telling you about the cable company that couldn't innovate, even though they had the business plan for all the new services. An entire decade passed, tens of billions of dollars of value was created on the internet. The cable companies did nothing. Here you have a business that in 18 months has migrated 60% of its base to a brand new service. And they're closing in on traditional TV. These are the premium channels. These are the premium pay TV channels in the United States. And this chart's just a little bit out of date. Netflix has now exceeded 20 million subscribers. And so as a result, they're now ahead of Starz and Showtime, and they're closing in on HBO. You'll see the CEO of HBO frequently in the press deriding Netflix and saying negative things. Well, that's not surprising because these guys are closing in so fast, and they came out of nowhere. 10 years ago, HBO could have bought Netflix. And here's an example, the comparison between subscribers, new subscriber additions. In the yellow, you see the number of new cable subscribers, and actually that's pay TV. Cable hasn't added any new subs, they're losing subs. The new subs in yellow are mostly coming from satellite and from IPTV services from the telcos. But look at Netflix last year, they added 4.5 million new subscribers in a single year. So they're growing very fast. They're not the only provider of this kind of a service. Apple has its own idea about what a video-on-demand service should be. They're using their iTunes metaphor, and the Apple TV box is $99. If you haven't seen them, they're the size of a hockey puck. They're so small that you could actually put it in your pocket and take it over to your friend's house, plug it in there, and watch videos on demand at your friend's place using their bandwidth. And of course, Google has introduced their service, which is much more oriented towards streaming. And in classic Google fashion, it's open to the web, and so they're streaming all that great video from the web directly to your television. This is a fairly early rollout. There's been a lot of backlash. The major media companies are incredibly threatened by Google Television, so they have not yet got the support of the big broadcasters in the US. And of course, just recently, Amazon introduced a new service that's basically a clone of Netflix, and they're rolling that in free to all the Amazon Prime subscribers. So there's a tremendous amount of innovation occurring in the video business in the United States. And what I would describe it as it's the unbundling of the video business. For many, many years, the video business has been a business of channels packaged and sold to you in tiers of service. And that's been how the pay TV business has worked for 30, 40 years. Well, now that's starting to unbundle. Just as we saw the music business get unbundled from albums into singles, as we've seen the news business get unbundled from print publications into articles that can be posted freely on the web and available on many different platforms. We're starting to see the unbundling of the video business. And the consumers now have an expectation that they're going to be able to watch whatever they want to watch, whenever they want to watch it, on whatever device they want to watch. This is unprecedented. So what are the incumbent companies doing about it? Well, they're nothing, really. They're still offering you the exact same cable set-top box that you had 10 years ago. They really haven't made a significant change to their service. What they are trying to do is figure out a way to throttle these new services. And this is one of the big dangers that is inherent in the consolidation of media. And so, again, back to my diagram about the pay TV business and how it's grown. So you have these new services, these new video services, and many cable operators are exploring a way to turn them into a premium tier on the internet through pricing models, through some sort of packaging model. So they'd like to basically recreate or resurrect the cable model on the web. Another approach is to simply dial back the bandwidth. So they can use a quality of service tool to simply degrade the bandwidth that's available for video. And by the way, they do know what services you're looking at. So in the United States, we already know that some cable operators have dialed down the bandwidth for BitTorrent. They've even terminated people's services who are using BitTorrent. We also know that in other countries, for instance in Canada, we know that some of the cable operators there are degrading some of these video services, these so-called over-the-top video services. So they feel the right to peer into your stream and see what you're looking at and thereby and manipulate your service. This is quite different from the concept of a common carrier, which was non-discriminatory. Any content that ran over the network, any bits that ran over the network were treated equally. What we're starting to see is that in this private infrastructure, these broadband providers are starting to discriminate between services. And so what they could do is dial back the bandwidth and maybe dial it back altogether and block these services. That's a real temptation, particularly when they own content services of their own. This is the danger inherent in vertical integration. That if you own your own content services, why would you allow these guys to ride free in your network, dial them back altogether, get rid of it, and now you can offer your own video content instead? And so this is a real risk. Now, the United States government, our FCC, our regulatory body, is keeping close eye on this, but it's a very difficult thing to monitor. It's not transparent what's happening inside of the network, so we don't actually know if your service is being degraded. An artist did this rendition, but I thought it was kind of illustrative. This is a concept for how a telco might try to package the internet in the future. And this is a very chilling diagram. You can get basic access to the internet for $29.95 a month, and then tiers of service packaged you can add on. For another $5, you can get all these search engines. For another $5, you get an international package. For $10, you can get an extra $10 a month, you can get video services. Or perhaps another $5, you can get access to game services. This ought to be a chilling thought to anyone who enjoys open access to the web and the ability to go wherever they want and watch whatever they want or consume whatever content they want. And yet this is being contemplated. Already, in many countries, they're starting to introduce these surcharges, a cap on top of your consumption. And then if you exceed the amount of bandwidth that you're allotted each month, then they hit you with excess fees. I just got hit with one of these when I was in Canada. It was a $60 surcharge on my data package. I was blown away when I got that. So this has created quite a stir in Canada. They call it usage-based billing, where there's an actual cap. And they haven't done a great job of educating people about it. And what's happening is that's a deterrent. It's actually causing people to be cautious about consuming too much bandwidth. So they're cautious about trying new services. They're not rushing out to embrace these new services because they're afraid they're going to hit their monthly cap and get hit with these extraordinary fees. In Canada, they charge you $2 per gigabyte if you go over your monthly allotment of bandwidth. $2 per gigabyte. A typical movie streamed to your TV could be anywhere from 2 to 4 gigabytes of data. So you could end up paying somewhere between $4 to $8 just for the bandwidth on top of whatever you're paying for the video service. And you might not even know that you hit that level. You might not even know that you exceeded your limit. So this is actually bad. It's going to chill consumer behavior. It's going to cause consumers to be very cautious about adopting these new services. And by the way, this is entirely deliberate. This is not an accident. They have a full understanding of what's happening. So these are methodologies for controlling the consumer. Now, if you were a consumer and you knew this, you certainly wouldn't sign up for a service like that. You would say, the hell with that. I'm going to try something else. I'd cut the cord. I'd run screaming for the hills and run away. So they've adopted a novel technique. They lie to their consumer about the services they're offering. And you'll see this in the United States. It's so common that we take it for granted. When they talk to you about high-speed internet, what they really mean is 10 times slower than Japan. And here, apparently, it's even worse because that's the United States on the left. The little red circle way over on the right, that unfortunately is Australia. So you're somewhere even, unfortunately, you have even less bandwidth here to the home. When they talk about unlimited data, a buffet, all you can eat, what they really mean is until we say stop, until you reach your monthly allotment. This is the notification that you get from Rogers Telecom in Canada when you've reached your 75 gigabit per month limit. And when they tell you, we pay attention to our customers, well, what they really mean there is we're using deep packet inspection to survey you to make sure that you're not going outside of our services and consuming your own services. And this is Brian Roberts, the CEO of Comcast. And when he says, our plan to totally reinvent television, well, what he really means is our plan to mimic Netflix. Well, I don't think consumers are dumb. I think people are actually very smart. And so I think most people are not going to be fooled by this. I don't think most people are going to say, well, gee, yeah, I guess we're better off if these guys control what services we can get to. I'm hopeful that consumers are smart enough. But actually what troubles me even more is the notion that these companies believe their own bullshit. And this is a real concern, right? If you talk about it and you say, if you constantly boast about your innovation and the great services that you offer and stuff, you can kind of begin to delude yourself into believing that somehow you're that muscular, handsome fellow in the mirror there, even when you're a flabby and out of shape, skinny person. We have many examples of that. If you read Tim Wu's book, He referred to that briefly this morning. If you read his book, you'll see many examples of dominant telcos and dominant information empires who, at the peak of their power, simply stifled innovation and they became stagnant. But they protested to the government. Every time the government would come look at them and say, hey, you know, you have to unbundle, you have to open up, or we're going to start an antitrust procedure against you, they would protest that they were all about innovation. AT&T did this in the 1980s. They actually stretched it out from the 1960s to the 1980s when they were the dominant telco. But really, seriously, for 20 years, there was no innovation whatsoever in telecommunications in the United States. More recently, Microsoft was so dominant in internet technologies, and they swore up and down when they were in front of Capitol Hill being investigated for antitrust that they were the leaders of innovation. You heard that all the time. But in fact, what they were really trying to do was stifle innovation to the best of their ability. Now, this is not actually from Microsoft, but the CEO, Steve Ballmer, did say this. He did make this comment that open source programming is a kind of socialism or communism. Of course, in America, those are bad words. It's scary stuff, right? Well, the alternative is actually a fundamental shift, and it's a big deal. This openness that we're referring to, this alternative, it begins with open protocols and open standards, open source software, and then open platforms and the open APIs that have access to those platforms that enable anyone who desires to get out there and create a new service to do so. And that has unleashed a torrent of innovation, tremendous proliferation of creativity. That's a key driver. That's the alternative future. That's really the alternative to that circumscribed future that I just described to you a moment ago. And Tim Riley described it like this. He talked about a web of participation or an architecture of participation. And the key point there is it's not just open to developers or publishers that want to freely publish. Of course, it is open to them. But it's also open to the users. Every person in the network is a participant in some fashion. And all day you've been hearing examples about social media that enable people to participate in meaningful ways. So let's return to our question from the beginning of the talk. The Ludwig Mies van der Rohe quote about the will of the age. Which architecture actually expresses the will of our age? If you're in the media business and someone brings you a new idea for a business, you can use this handy checklist to determine which type of architecture we're referring to. If they bring you in a business and it's designed, the priority is to monetize. And if it's all about one-way distribution of information and control points and distribution and so forth, it's probably a coercive architecture. Whereas on the other hand, if the business is optimized for audience growth, user growth, and enables a two-way dialogue between the audience and the creators of the content, and if it's all about creating abundance and the ability for people to virally promote it and get involved with the content and share it with their friends and so forth, then it's probably more likely to be in that collaborative structure. And it's probably going to grow much faster as well. If it's about something that a central company or a programmer controls the scheduling of, if it's about appointment viewing where people have to sit down, that's probably coercive. If it's on demand, a la carte, unbundled, and freely available to people on whatever device they wish, then it's probably more on the cooperative side. But the most important part of this diagram is really the role of the user. If you look toward the bottom of it, controlled by programmer or controlled by audience, the audience role in a coercive environment is simply to be an isolated, on their own, like in their own little peep show booth, an isolated consumer of services, and your job is to sit there and watch and pay. Or in a cooperative environment, you're meant to be a connected participant who's aware that other people are watching and you can freely share and comment and talk to them and so forth. And of course, the audience retention mode in a coercive environment is to impose high switching costs, termination fees or penalties if people decide to switch out of your service, whereas in a cooperative environment, the business owner has to earn the respect and loyalty of their customers. These are fundamentally different schemes. Now, by the way, earlier today I was talking to someone about when media companies acquire internet businesses, often they fail. The most recent example, the most spectacular example of recent memory is News Corp's acquisition of MySpace. But there are many examples of this. One of the reasons they fail is that the moment they bring those internet businesses into the traditional media, they switch from a cooperative mode into a coercive mode, and the thing that drove the growth of the thing instantly, overnight, evaporates. And so earlier you heard Tim Wu talk about scarcity models. What I'm trying to articulate here is a checklist of the features of things that are involved in abundance models, the economics of abundance. And the rest of my talk is going to be a little bit about that. Here's what's behind it. We now have access to more media technology than ever in history. If you go back to 1995, 15 years ago, your typical household had these things in it: a telephone, a television, a VCR. They all did one thing, right? The telephone, you could just make voice calls on it. The television, well, it was just an analog TV, a tuned-in television. The VCR could just record on tape. The cable set-top box, it was really very primitive. It just descrambled the cable service, right? That's all it was there to do. But just 15 years later, by 2010, your typical house had these things. And I'm not exaggerating. The typical household in the United States has these things. It's got digital television, digital phones. It's got internet. It's got a variety of different devices. And what makes these devices so interesting and empowering is that they're all miniature computers. They're all designed for the network. They're all designed to multitask. They're versatile devices. And not only that, but what rides on top of them is a proliferation of protocols, new communication protocols that enable us to have entirely new communications experiences that simply did not exist 15 years before. They did not exist outside of academia and the Defense Department. And so now this is available to everyone, and that's where this proliferation, this incredible rapid growth of new media services, these social media services, is happening from. You simply have more devices in the hands of people, they're more versatile, and they have all these open protocols for communication that simply weren't available to people 15 years ago. So as a result, information is increasing faster than anything ever in history. Let me take you through that. Egypt's Tahrir Square. Just a few weeks ago, we had a tremendous example of this. Now, I know there's been a lot of buzz around social media and the revolutions and the rebellions and so forth that are happening in North Africa right now. Let me take you through a different perspective on this than one you've heard today. Look at what the people in Tahrir Square are holding. Now, I'm not talking about the baby in blue. But look at what they're holding in their hands. If you look at the photos of the people at Tahrir Square that gathered there for that 4-week period, that standoff with the government, you'll notice that there's something in common. You'll see what people have in their hands. Yes, here they're holding flags, but you see what else they're holding. And here you have a great example. You know, they're waving their shoes. A lot of people are waving their shoes that are at Mubarak because he was giving a speech at that time on the video monitor. But the other people, you can see they're holding their phones. And this is the power of the open web. This is the power of the social web, which is millions of people doing little things together, and you get this incredible growth rate. Look at this. In a period of 4 weeks, this is the number of photos that were uploaded that you can find. If you search for Tahrir Square, you'll see 23 million photos were taken during that period. So that, you know, I think the previous speaker made a very good point. These are not social media revolutions. That's Western hype. And actually, the number of people doing this is actually relatively small. Not everybody there has a mobile phone. Not everybody there has a mobile phone with internet access. So it's a relatively small segment. But even that number of active participants can generate this incredible tidal wave, this incredible proliferation of content. The 23 million photos generated in a month. Earlier today, you heard Kevin mention this quote, and he showed the video clip of Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, say that every 2 days we create as much information as we did up till 2003. Well, here's a couple other data points for that, just to put that in perspective for you. You can see in this diagram from The Economist the logarithmic increase in the sheer volume of information that is taking place right now. And on the right side, I grabbed a couple of headlines from an industry press release for the storage industry, which says that in 2010, we created 1.2 zettabytes of data. Now, does anyone know what a zettabyte is? That's a 1 followed by 21 zeros. Another way to look at it is it's 1.2 trillion gigabytes of data. That's just generated in a single year, and of course it's going to increase this year because we're now in that knee of the curve where we start to hit the logarithmic growth, the logarithmic increase. It's simply a function of lots of devices that enable people to communicate a lot more ways than they previously had, and then lots of great new social software that makes it really easy for people to share and connect and pass it on. So it's kind of a multiplier effect there. Facebook just passed the 600 million user threshold. Do you know how many photos are uploaded to Facebook every month? 3 billion photos are uploaded to Facebook every single month. This year, 40 billion photos will be uploaded to Facebook. Now, to put that in contrast for you, you might be familiar with Flickr. Flickr was considered the largest photo collection on the web. They have 5 billion photos. Twice that amount is uploaded every couple of months onto Facebook, every quarter. I mean, that's just a staggering difference, right? So that's the power of giving people all these communication tools. And of course, the cost of creating videos dropped tremendously. Flip cameras now cost $125 in the United States. Many mobile phones have them built in. The revolutionary capability for people to video what's happening. And you've seen this with YouTube. Every minute of every day on YouTube, 35 hours of video is uploaded. Every minute of the day, a day and a half of video is uploaded to YouTube. This is a staggering number. So the sheer increase in the amount of information is quite impressive. It's quite amazing. And Kevin Kelly recently published a brilliant book, which is about what technology wants, worthwhile looking. 10 years ago, he made this prediction in a previous book. He said, don't seek refuge in scarcity. Far greater wealth will be created by exploiting the plenitude. Now, he made that prediction back in 1999 or 2000 when his previous book came out. That stayed with me. I thought about that quite a lot because if you look at the businesses that are being successful in this new environment, this new open environment, they are companies that have learned how to harness this incredible explosion of information. And so there's a mentality in traditional media companies that somehow the internet is secondary. Somehow the internet is that group of people down the hallway, the interns that are doing Twitter for a TV company, for instance. They don't necessarily take it seriously. And what they're missing is that, in fact, tremendous value has been generated by the internet companies. And now, in terms of market capitalization, the 8 largest media companies in the United States are almost exactly the same in valuation as the 7 largest internet companies. So old media and new media are valued equally, but which side has the momentum? Which side has the growth potential? It's quite clear to me that the growth is on the side of the abundance. The companies on the left side of the diagram have figured out how to harness abundance and grow their businesses. Let me end with 5 trends to keep an eye on. I'm a big believer in traditional media. I've worked for a lot of major media companies, and I'm committed to the idea that people still want to watch television. They love TV. So how can a TV company take advantage of all these new social trends and all this incredible abundance of information? Here are a couple of the ways. Audience is data. This is a tremendous change. Today, I'm so stunned because many, many traditional media companies still sell on the internet the exact same way they've been selling for the last 10, 20, 30, sometimes 100 years, which is that they sell content as a proxy for audience. So if you're an advertiser and you want to reach men 25 to 44, they'll say, well, we've got the sports section, we've got the finance section, we've got the news section. They literally still sell content as a proxy for audience. This is absurd. In this day and age of the web, with real-time advertising, the ability to target exactly, with precision, an audience who you know exactly who they are, there's an ability now for any media company to start to segment their audience and do behavioral targeting. I was very impressed yesterday to hear that our host here today, Fairfax, is quite focused on this as a priority. It's very, very important. I recently joined the board of this company, Visual DNA. It's a UK company that is a leader in opt-in technology. Opt-in technology means that users freely tell them about themselves. They freely say, here are my habits, and here's what I do offline when I'm not on the web. This is what I like to do. These are my hobbies. They figured out a way to make it worthwhile for the audience to reveal themselves in this way. So they opt in. That's compliant with all privacy law in every part of the world. So this is a company that I think is optimized for the future. They help media companies obtain something on the order of an 800% lift in CPMs because they can now sell precise information about the audience and deliver advertising to exactly the audience in real time that they wish to deliver to. Another major trend is social TV viewing. You're going to hear a lot about this. There's a lot of different companies pursuing this, probably dozens right now. Here are a couple of examples. Yap TV, Get Glue, and Mizo. And what you'll find that they all have in common is that they figured out ways to create a kind of game-like experience so that you'll check in to your favorite TV program. The best of these companies make it very easy to check in. You don't have to do anything manually. The application, it might be on your iPhone, it might be on your iPad. The application simply listens to the audio track of television, and it can sample about 4 seconds, and it's able to identify what show you're watching and sync up the interactivity with it, and it'll automatically pull in the relevant Twitter stream. It'll automatically let your friends know that you checked in on Facebook and let them know that you're watching that particular show. So this enables social TV with no effort whatsoever. So all of these companies, and there are dozens of others competing in this space, are making it possible for broadcasters to harness that great potential of social media, create that return path from the audience. The audience can actually participate in the dialogue in some fashion, and actually thereby they're also going to create more value for their advertisers because they'll be able to deliver much better engagement than they've ever been able to demonstrate with plain old broadcast. Another trend is remix culture. Here's a local hero, Pogo. Have you guys seen his videos? I mean, it's fantastic stuff, right? So Pogo is a young guy. He's a DJ. He remixes old Disney clips. He's also remixed Harry Potter. His videos have had 44 million views altogether on YouTube. Now, 10 years ago, a major movie studio like Disney would have shut him down with a cease and desist letter. They would have sent an army of attorneys to go close him down. Well, this is actually quite profoundly intelligent, I think. What Disney has done instead is they give him a deal. They gave him a contract, and they said, hey, you're making our stuff hip and relevant to an entirely new audience. So they're working with him in a cooperative mode. Another example of remix culture is machinima. Sorry. How many people have seen machinima or have heard about machinima? Oh, very, very good. I recently spoke to another audience, and no one had heard of them. It's the most important media company you've never heard of. Machinima is the term. You take a machine and combine it with the word cinema. And so what people are doing, mostly it's gamers, it's mostly teenage boys. They're taking their PlayStations and their Xboxes and they're creating new narratives. They're creating movies using the characters inside of 3D games. And then they add voices and sound effects to them. They create little movies, basically, from their Xbox. And they post them to machinima.com. Now look at the numbers at the bottom. This is really quite extraordinary. 50 million unique visitors a month in January. Almost 500 million views a month. These are numbers that broadcast companies would be proud to have. This is actually quite staggering, the size of this thing. And it's a company that most people have never even heard of. So they've been able to harness that user-generated content and create a kind of entirely new ecosystem there. It was outside the notice of traditional media. Crowdsourced creative. You know, if you're going to operate on the web, you have to learn how to operate with very thin margins. And that's very, very difficult for a traditional media company to do. TV business is an expensive business. This is one of the big fears that the broadcasters have about getting on the web, is that they're worried they're not going to be able to monetize in quite the same way. Well, if you're going to try to squeeze your margins, you're going to have to find new ways to get the job done. This is a company in the United States, Pop Tent. They found a way to crowdsource TV commercials. And they're now working with major agencies and major brands. And they run these campaigns where fans of a product create their own commercials. And they'll get hundreds, sometimes thousands of submissions. And what you get in exchange is a prize. And so you can see the prize levels aren't outrageous, $12,000, $10,000, and so forth. And sometimes they'll spread that around. The first top 10 winners might each get a piece of that pie. Here's what's interesting about it. If you've been doing video on the web, if you've been a publisher and you've had video on the web, one of the most annoying things is when you have an advertiser come in and they do a big buy, and so you're going to run their pre-roll spot in front of your video clip, but it's the same damn spot. You know, and so they're taking a TV spot, maybe a 30-second spot, they cut it down to a 15, and they drop that in front of every clip. So if you have a fan who's watching video on your site, they watch 5, 6, 7 clips, you want them to stay, you want them to keep watching. But that fan, it's oppressive. They see the same damn ad again and again and again. It's annoying. Now, what these guys have done, they figured out a way to come up with hundreds of variations on the creative for cheap, actually at no cost. So crowdsourced creative can be a very powerful way to harness the collective activity of the crowd. Another example of that, you probably have heard about this. Ridley Scott produced this film that just was shown at the Sundance Film Festival. It's a documentary where 80,000 videos were submitted to YouTube. And of course, it must have taken them months to go through that and cut it down. And they created a documentary called Life in a Day. And it's snippets of different people's days from around the world. One day, I think it was July 24 of last year. But they literally had 80,000 submissions to be a part of that. There's another organization. I know these guys in New York. I'm very impressed by what they're doing. The founder of this company has taught thousands and thousands of journalists how to become video journalists. And so he's done this again and again. He started to build up a library of video clips, and he decided to turn this into an online school called the New York Video School. And it enables people to learn how to cut video, how to produce video, how to light video, and most importantly, how to record sound, because nobody knows how to do that. And so if you look on YouTube, you'll see now the quality threshold's going up, 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 right? Because people are starting to get a little bit more versatile. People are starting to become visually literate. They're becoming film literate. And it's things like New York Film School, New York Video School that are doing that. Last trend for you. Virtual cable operator. It's a new concept. Pay attention to it. You're going to start to hear about it more and more. This company is IVTV. They're probably going to get sued into submission. They might go away, just as Napster did. You know, the breakthrough companies often get crushed, but then they set the precedent. IV has created this notion of taking a cable TV, the entire service, and simply turning it into an IPTV channel, video streamed on the web. For $4.95 a month, you can actually watch all the video that's being streamed on cable television. Naturally, every broadcaster in the United States went absolutely bananas and came after these guys. And there was recently a court issued a preliminary injunction to shut down the service. So who knows what their fate is. Why I included here, though, is that this trend, if they're successful, and I don't see why they're not going to be successful, because if you think about the way back origins of cable television, they were retransmitting a broadcast signal through a cable pipe. And of course, the broadcasters didn't like that at the time, and they tried to stop them. So I think there's actually a reasonable legal precedent for such a service to exist. And if it does, then there's no reason why traditional cable companies won't also adopt this and become virtual cable companies and start to offer their video services outside of their geographic footprint. So let me end with this one thought. If you thought that new media was a part of your business, a division, a subset, something down the hall, or something that you would drop on the desk of that new guy that you just hired, it's very important for you to realize that the traditional media businesses are going through this unbundling process, just as we've seen the music business go through, just as we've seen advertising and commerce go through that transition. Television's about to go through that transition. And as Marshall McLuhan, the great Canadian media theorist, said, a new medium is never an addition to an old one, nor does it ever leave the old one in place. It never ceases to oppress the older media until it finds new shapes and new positions for them. And that is indeed the process that we're going through right now. Thank you for your time.